My body went cold. We had just been together 10 minutes ago. He shifted in his sleep and mumbled something, completely unaware that, in that exact moment, I was reading the version of me he had created for another woman. Frigid, emotionally unavailable, rejecting him. And that's when I understood something that hurt more than the cheating. He didn't just betray me, he rewrote me, and I had no idea how long he'd been telling her that story. I never thought of myself as cold. That's the part that keeps echoing in my head. Cold is a word you use for someone distant, detached, uninterested. That wasn't me. We weren't a dead bedroom couple, we weren't roommates, we weren't strangers passing each other in the hallway. We had a life, we had routines, we had intimacy. Maybe not fireworks every night, maybe not some cinematic version of passion, but we had something real, predictable, steady, human. He would reach for me in the kitchen sometimes, wrap an arm around my waist, press his face into my neck. We'd sit on the couch with my legs over his lap. He'd absent-mindedly trace circles on my skin while watching TV. At night, he'd pull me closer. And yes, we had sex, not out of obligation, not forced, not mechanical, sometimes spontaneous, sometimes planned, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, normal. So when I saw the word cold, it didn't just sting, it disoriented me. Because how do you defend yourself against a version of you that doesn't exist? I went back to the messages. There were weeks of them, no, months. He had been constructing this version of me piece by piece. She turns away when I try. It feels like I'm begging. I don't think she even wants me anymore. I remember sitting there thinking, when did I turn away? When did I beg him to stop touching me? When did I make him feel unwanted? Because the night before that message, we had been together, and the week before that. And 2 days after that message, he initiated again. He kissed me like he meant it. He held my face in his hands. And then, apparently, he texted her in the bathroom. I started scrolling obsessively. He wasn't just complaining, he was crafting. He would send her these long paragraphs about feeling rejected, about feeling unseen, about craving connection. He described our marriage like it was a frozen wasteland, like he was trapped beside an ice sculpture. And the most terrifying part? If I hadn't read those messages, I would have believed him if he ever said it to my face, because he had started planting seeds, little comments. You've been distant lately. You don't seem that into it. Are you sure you even enjoy this? At the time, I thought it was insecurity. I'd laugh it off. Or reassure him. Of course I enjoy this. Of course I want you. And every time I reassured him, I thought I was nurturing us. Now I see what he was doing. He was building a defense. He needed a story, because cheating without a reason makes you the villain. But cheating because your wife is frigid, that makes you misunderstood. I went back to one message that wouldn't leave my mind. I feel like I'm sleeping next to someone who tolerates me. Tolerates. I replayed every night in my head. Did I look bored? Did I seem distracted? Did I sigh too heavily? Was I not enthusiastic enough? I started dissecting myself like I was evidence in a case. And then something else hit me. The dates. I checked the timestamp on that message. And I checked my calendar. That night, the one where he said I tolerated him, was the same night we had stayed up past midnight laughing about something stupid on YouTube. He had pulled me closer and whispered, I love this, just us. I remember that clearly. So how did that become tolerating? That's when I realized this wasn't about perception. It was about necessity. He needed me to be cold. He needed me to reject him. Because otherwise, what was he doing with her? I kept reading. There were descriptions of me that felt like character assassination. She doesn't initiate. She just lies there. It feels empty. Empty. I wanted to throw up. Because if that were true, why did he keep coming back to my side of the bed? Why did he initiate? Why did he respond? Why did he hold me afterward? Why did he say that was nice and kiss my forehead? Unless the truth didn't matter. Unless the truth was inconvenient. Unless the affair required distortion. I noticed something else. The more emotionally invested she became, the colder I became in his narrative. At first he said we were drifting. Then I was emotionally unavailable. Then I was cold. Then I was frigid. Escalation. He was selling a storyline. And she was buying it. And I was living inside it without knowing. The worst part wasn't imagining them together. It was imagining him describing me. My body, my reactions, our private moments, filtered, twisted, simplified. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated. Because cheating is one kind of violation. But narrating your wife as a failure to justify cheating, that's something else. That's rewriting her reality. I looked at him sleeping beside me, peaceful, breathing evenly. The same man who had just held me like he meant it. And I wondered, how many versions of me exist in his phone? How long has he been telling her I'm cold? And if I'm cold in his story, what else am I? I didn't confront him the next morning. That surprises people when I tell this story. But confrontation requires certainty. And at that point, I didn't have certainty. I had shock. I had screenshots. I had a word that didn't fit my life. Cold. So instead of waking him up, instead of shaking him and demanding explanations, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet. He woke up like he always did, stretching, checking his phone, pulling me closer for a second before getting out of bed. "Morning," he murmured, brushing his lips against my temple. I watched him, studied him. There was no guilt in his eyes, no tension, no distance. He looked normal. That was the most disturbing part, because somewhere between that kiss and the coffee machine downstairs, he had already decided who I was in someone else's story, and I was determined to read every chapter. That day, I found an excuse to be alone. He went to work, I stayed home, and I opened the thread again, not just to glance, to analyze. He hadn't just complained, he had structured it. At first, it was subtle. "I don't think she's into me lately." Then it grew. "She's been emotionally distant for months." Months. I scrolled up to check the date, 3 weeks earlier. We had gone on a weekend trip that month. He had booked it. He had initiated. He had told me he felt connected. But to her, I was months away. He wasn't reacting. He was pre-constructing. That's when I started to notice the pattern. He always framed himself as patient, long-suffering, trying. I've tried to fix it. I've tried to talk to her. I'm tired of feeling unwanted. He painted himself as a man starved of affection. But here's what made my hands shake. On the night he told her, "I never initiate," I had. I remembered it clearly. I had kissed him first. I had pulled him toward me. He had laughed and said, "Well, look at you." And later that same night when I fell asleep, he texted her. It feels forced, like she's doing it out of obligation. Obligation. I read that message at least 10 times. Not because I was confused, because I was stunned at the precision of the lie. It wasn't random exaggeration. It was a strategic reframing. He was editing reality in real time, and she responded exactly how he needed her to. "You deserve someone who wants you." Of course she would say that. He was feeding her a version of me that made her feel necessary, heroic, chosen, the rescuer of a neglected man. And every time she leaned in emotionally, he leaned further away from the truth. I noticed something else. He often texted her after we were together. Not before, not instead of, after. That detail broke something in me. Because it meant he wasn't replacing me. He was doubling. He was taking what we had and turning it into currency. Using our intimacy as proof of my coldness, which makes no sense unless you understand the psychology. If he told her he was sleeping with me, she might pull back. If he admitted we were fine, she might feel disposable. So he couldn't say, "We're still close." He had to say, "She lies there. She's disconnected. She makes me feel alone." He turned our private moments into evidence against me. I kept scrolling. There were voice notes. My stomach dropped. I pressed play. His voice, low, familiar, the same tone he used when he was tired at night, carried through the speaker. "I just don't feel wanted anymore." I felt my pulse in my ears because he had said that to me once, and I had responded gently. "What do you mean?" And he had shrugged it off. Now I was hearing him say it again, to her, but with additions. "With her, it's like there's no passion. I feel rejected all the time." Rejected. The word hit differently. Rejected implies refusal. I tried to remember. When did I reject him? Yes, there were nights I was tired. Yes, there were times I said, "Not tonight." But so did he. That's marriage. That's humanity. That's normal fluctuation. He had turned normal into narrative. And then he escalated. Weeks into the thread, the language sharpened. "She's frigid." There it was. The word. Frigid. I stopped breathing, because cold can be emotional. Distant can be miscommunication, but frigid. That's sexual. That's defective. That's humiliating. I read the entire paragraph. He wrote, "It's like sleeping next to someone who doesn't feel anything. I can't remember the last time she wanted me." I checked the date again. 4 days before that message, we had been together, and afterward, he had held me. He had said, "That was perfect." Perfect. So which one was the lie? The compliment or the complaint? And that's when something more disturbing surfaced. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misremembering. He was calculating. Because in between messages about how frigid I was, there were flirty exchanges, plans, emotional intimacy. He would say things like, "With you, it feels different." Different. Meaning what? Meaning alive, meaning wanted. But he was still coming to my bed every night, still touching me, still initiating, still responding. He wasn't deprived, he was greedy. And the only way to sustain both women was to fracture reality. I started building my own timeline. I opened my calendar, marked nights we were together, cross-referenced them with his messages. The pattern was undeniable. Every time our intimacy increased, his complaints to her intensified. It was almost mathematical. He needed her to believe he was suffering. Because if she knew the truth, that he was still fully engaged at home, she might question him. And he couldn't risk that. He needed me to be the problem, not because I was, but because his affair required it. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't just cheating. This was character destruction. And the worst part? He was doing it while still touching me, still kissing me, still looking me in the eye, still telling me he loved me. He wasn't avoiding intimacy, he was weaponizing it. And I hadn't even reached the most disturbing part yet. Because deeper in the thread, he said something that made my hands start shaking. Something that turned this from infidelity into something darker, and I wasn't sure I was ready to read it. The message that made my hands shake wasn't long. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even dramatic. It was specific. Too specific. She just lies there. It's like she's somewhere else. I stopped breathing. Because that wasn't vague. That wasn't emotional interpretation. That was a description of us, of something private, of something I thought belonged to the two of us. I read it again. She just lies there. I could feel my body in the memory of those nights. I wasn't absent. I wasn't numb. I wasn't detached. We weren't performing for an audience. We were married. There were slow nights. There were playful nights. There were quiet, tender moments. There were nights when I initiated. There were nights when he did. There were nights when we both laughed halfway through because something felt awkward or human or imperfect, normal. But to her, he had turned me into a corpse, and I realized something that felt almost worse than the cheating. He was narrating my body. He wasn't just saying I was cold. He was describing how I moved, how I reacted, how I responded. And every description was filtered through distortion. I kept reading. The more intimate the detail, the more distorted the conclusion. She doesn't look at me the way she used to. He wrote that 2 days after we had gone out to dinner and I had told him he looked good in that navy shirt. I remembered touching his chest across the table. He smiled then. So when exactly did I stop looking at him? Or did he need to believe I had? There were other lines. I feel like I'm begging for affection. Begging. The word implied humiliation, desperation. I replayed our last few weeks in my head. He hadn't begged. He had reached for me, and I had reached back. So what was he begging for? More? Different? Or something that justified what he was already doing? That's when the pattern shifted. It wasn't just that he was complaining, he was contrasting. He would describe me as distant, then describe her as responsive. He would say I was mechanical, then tell her she made him feel alive. He was splitting the world into two categories: cold wife, warm escape. And the only way that contrast works is if you exaggerate the cold. I felt nauseous thinking about how many of those messages were probably sent minutes after we were together. I checked. One message was sent at 12:43 a.m. We had been in bed by midnight. We had fallen asleep tangled together. So sometime between my breathing evening out and his thumb typing in the dark, he decided I had been empty. That's when it stopped feeling like betrayal and started feeling like violation, because he wasn't just cheating on my body, he was exporting it, reframing it, selling a version of it to someone else, and she believed it. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? He was feeding her vulnerability. He was positioning himself as neglected. I don't even think she desires me anymore. That one made my chest tighten. Desire is private. It's fragile. It's layered. It's not constant fireworks. It's subtle glances. It's quiet moments. It's comfort. And yes, sometimes it's fatigue. But desire doesn't vanish because you're tired on a Tuesday. He had turned normal fluctuations into permanent rejection. I started scrolling faster. And then I found something worse. He had sent her a voice note describing one of our nights. He didn't describe what happened, but he described how it felt. Disconnected. That word again. Disconnected. I pressed play and listened carefully. His tone was calm, measured. There was no guilt in it, just explanation. I don't know. It just feels like she's going through the motions. Motions. I remember that night. I had been stressed about work, but I wasn't absent. We had talked afterward. He had asked if I was okay. I had said yes, and he kissed my forehead. So when did that become going through the motions? Unless he needed it to. That's when the deeper truth hit me. If he admitted we were still intimate and connected, then his affair wasn't about deprivation. It was about choice. And choice is harder to defend. But if he convinced her, and maybe himself, that I was frigid, cold, withholding, then he wasn't betraying a loving marriage. He was escaping a loveless one. He was turning infidelity into survival, and he was using me as the prop. I scrolled to a message that made my vision blur. Sometimes I feel like she pushes me into someone else's arms. Pushes me. I actually laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. He had never told me he felt unwanted, not seriously, not in a way that implied crisis. He had never sat me down and said, "I feel alone." Instead, he had texted another woman and blamed me. He had rewritten the script without ever inviting me into the conversation. And then it hit me again. We were still having sex, regularly. So what exactly was I withholding? If I was frigid, why was he initiating? If I was cold, why was he responding? If I was pushing him away, why was he in my bed every night? The answer was brutal, because the physical relationship at home didn't threaten the emotional one outside. As long as she believed he was starving, he needed her to feel special. He needed her to feel like she was the warmth he lacked. And warmth only matters if there's cold. So he manufactured it, and I became the winter. That's when I understood something even more painful. He wasn't confused about me. He wasn't misunderstanding me. He was curating me. He was selecting details that made me look defective. Because defective wives justify affairs. Happy marriages don't. And in that moment, I realized something that cut deeper than the messages. He wasn't betraying me in secret. He was betraying me in narrative. And narrative lives longer. Affairs end. Stories linger. What terrified me wasn't that he had slept with her. It was that somewhere in her mind, I existed as the woman who drove him there. Cold, frigid, unresponsive. The kind of wife who makes a man lonely. And I had never agreed to be that character. He assigned it to me, without my consent, without my knowledge. And I wasn't sure which hurt more, that he cheated, or that he made me the reason. But I hadn't even seen the full extent of the damage yet, because further down in that thread, there was a message where he promised something that made the entire story shift. And I wasn't ready for what it implied. I didn't scream. That surprises people too. When you imagine confronting someone who betrayed you like that, you picture chaos, tears, broken objects, raised voices. But I didn't feel chaotic. I felt surgical. I waited until the evening. We were in the kitchen, normal lighting, normal dinner, normal plates. He was telling me something about work while scrolling on his phone. The same phone, the one that held the alternate version of me. I interrupted him mid-sentence. "Why do you tell her I'm frigid?" He froze. It was subtle, but I saw it. The split-second calculation, the scan of my face, the attempt to read how much I knew. "What?" he said, not confused, buying time. "I read the messages," I replied. I didn't elaborate, I didn't accuse, I didn't cry, I just watched him. He put the phone down slowly, like someone disarming a weapon. "It's not what you think." Of course it wasn't. "It says exactly what it says," I answered. Silence. Then the pivot. I was venting, that word again, minimizing. He ran a hand through his hair. "You know, things haven't felt right between us." There it was. The seed he'd been planting. "You told her I haven't touched you in months. You've been distant." "That's not the same thing." He didn't deny it. He reframed it. "You've been emotionally unavailable." I felt something inside me tighten. "You initiated 3 nights ago. That doesn't mean you were present." Present. He was now critiquing my internal state. You said I just lie there. He exhaled sharply. Sometimes it feels that way. Feels. He had moved into subjectivity. There's no way to disprove how something feels. He stood up, pacing slightly. I've tried to talk to you. When? I asked calmly. You shut down when I bring things up. I stared at him. When have I shut down? He hesitated. Well, not exactly shut down, but you don't respond. This was the moment I saw it clearly. He wasn't defending truth. He was defending consistency. If he admitted the messages were exaggerated, he'd expose the affair as unjustified. If he admitted we were intimate and connected, he'd look selfish. So instead, he had to protect the narrative. You told her I pushed you into someone else's arms. He scoffed. That was just a figure of speech. For what? For how alone I felt. Alone. He kept returning to that word. You've never told me you felt alone. I shouldn't have to beg. Beg. He loved that word. I leaned back against the counter. Did you ever ask? He paused. That's not the point. It was exactly the point. Because if he had asked, and I had ignored him, then his story had weight. But he hadn't asked. He had narrated. He moved closer to me. You know, intimacy isn't just physical. I almost laughed. He was the one who kept reducing it to performance. You're telling another woman I'm sexually cold, I said quietly. That's physical. It's emotional, he corrected. Then why are you still sleeping with me? That question landed. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. It's complicated. Of course it was. You say I don't want you, I continued. But you initiate. You respond, he countered. And you do too. He shook his head slightly. You don't understand what it feels like to feel unwanted. The irony almost suffocated me, because in that moment I was the one feeling unwanted, unseen, misrepresented. I walked toward the living room and sat down. He followed. I didn't mean it literally, he said finally. Then what did you mean? That things have felt off. That's not what you wrote. You're taking it too literally. He was retreating into ambiguity. Words like cold and frigid are literal. They're specific. They're damaging. You described me, I said softly. You described our bed. He went quiet. That's when the mask slipped just slightly. Not guilt, annoyance. Like I had disrupted something delicate. You read things that weren't meant for you. There it was, the shift. Not, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have seen it. You wrote lies that weren't meant for anyone. He sighed. They weren't lies. They were how I felt. So you felt like I never touched you? Yes, even though I did. Silence. You don't understand. Then explain it. He ran both hands through his hair again. You don't initiate the way you used to. Used to. Now we were negotiating nostalgia. Is that what makes someone frigid? You're twisting it. I wasn't twisting anything. He was. He sat down across from me. You're focusing on the words instead of the problem. The problem is you're having an affair. The problem is I felt alone first. There it was. The justification, the pivot, the full inversion. He needed to believe, and needed her to believe, that the affair was reaction, not action, that he was responding to coldness, not creating betrayal. You didn't feel alone, I said calmly. You felt entitled. That word landed harder than anything else had. His jaw tightened. You're overreacting. No tears came. No yelling, just clarity. Because at that moment, I understood something final. He would never admit that he rewrote me. He would never admit that we were still intimate while he told her we weren't. He would never say, I lied to justify myself. Instead, he would defend the feeling. Because feelings are fog, and fog protects you from accountability. But I had something stronger than fog now. I had timestamps, dates, patterns, and a realization that hurt more than the confrontation itself. He didn't just need her to see me as cold. He needed himself to believe it, and I wasn't sure whether that made it worse or just more calculated, because the next thing I found in that thread wasn't about how I treated him. It was about what he promised her, and that changed everything. After the confrontation, he slept. I didn't. He had rolled onto his side like always, breathing steady, as if the ground beneath us hadn't shifted. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Not the cheating, the dates. Something about the timing felt wrong, mechanical, repetitive. So at 2:17 a.m., I got up. I took his phone, not sneakily anymore, not guiltily, and went into the living room. I opened the thread again. Then I opened my calendar. Then my notes app. And I started mapping. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there was a pattern. There had to be. The first message I marked was the "She hasn't touched me in months" that was sent on March 14th. I scrolled back through my photos. March 10th, dinner out. We took a picture together. I remembered that night. March 12th, we stayed up late. I remember because I overslept the next morning. March 13th, we were intimate. March 14th, he texted her that I hadn't touched him in months. I stared at the calendar. It wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't emotional language. It was fabrication. I kept going. Another message. She turns away every time I try. Date, April 3rd, April 1st, we were together. April 2nd, he initiated again. April 3rd, she received a narrative about rejection. My chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. It was formula. He would sleep with me, then text her deprivation. He would kiss me, then text her loneliness. He would hold me, then text her absence. I started noticing something more disturbing. The more connected we were physically, the harsher his language became with her. On weeks when we were distant because of stress or schedules, the messages were lighter. But on weeks where intimacy was frequent, that's when I became frigid. That's when I was emotionally dead. That's when he said he felt trapped. It took me a moment to understand why. If he had a fulfilling physical relationship at home, he needed to compensate emotionally in the affair. He couldn't tell her, "I'm still close to my wife," because that would make her insecure. So instead, he inflated the deficit. He turned a normal marriage into a frozen wasteland. I kept marking timestamps. May 7th, he told her. She didn't even respond when I tried tonight. May 7th, 11:18 p.m. May 7th, 10:42 p.m. I found the photo he sent me. A stupid selfie from the kitchen where he wrote, "Come here." I remember laughing. We had gone upstairs. So what exactly did I not respond to? The realization hit like cold water. He wasn't misinterpreting. He was rewriting in real time. The phone lit up slightly as I scrolled further down, and that's when I saw it. The message that shifted everything. "I'm trying to figure out how to leave without destroying everything." My hand froze. Leave. I kept reading. I can't stay in a loveless marriage forever. Loveless. We had been to a wedding that week. We danced, we laughed, he introduced me proudly. He held my hand in front of everyone. Loveless. I checked the date again. It was sent 2 hours after we got home from that wedding. 2 hours. He had held me on the dance floor, and then told another woman he was trapped in lovelessness. My stomach turned. This wasn't about me being cold. This was about positioning. He was building the exit before the door existed. He was constructing a justification timeline. First, I'm lonely. Then, I'm trying. Then, she's frigid. Then, I feel trapped. Then, I'm trying to leave. The escalation was methodical. And suddenly something else made sense. His recent kindness. the flowers, the sudden "I appreciate you" messages, the small gifts. They weren't reconciliation, they were insulation. If he left, he wanted to say, "I tried." If she ever asked, he wanted proof. I stayed for months trying to fix it. He wasn't confused. He was layering protection for himself, for her, for the story, and I was the collateral. I scrolled further, and there it was, the message that made my chest feel hollow. "You're the only one who makes me feel wanted." The only one. I looked down at my own body, the same body he had touched hours before, the same body he initiated with, the same body he called frigid. He had taken our intimacy and downgraded it to survival. He had taken hers and elevated it to salvation, and he had done it through language. I leaned back on the couch. The clock read 3:41 a.m., and something inside me settled into a kind of brutal clarity. This wasn't about sex. It wasn't about frequency. It wasn't about performance. It was about narrative necessity. He needed her to believe he was starving, because she wouldn't stay if she knew he wasn't. He needed me to be defective, because if I wasn't, then he was just selfish. And selfish doesn't sound as poetic as lonely. I went back to the first message again. "She hasn't touched me in months." We had been together that week, twice. I felt something shift in my chest, not heartbreak, not rage, something colder, detachment, because in that moment I understood something that terrified me more than the cheating. He was capable of saying two completely opposite truths in the same 24 hours, and believing both were justified. That's not confusion, that's compartmentalization, and compartmentalization is dangerous because it allows you to hurt someone without feeling like the villain. I closed the calendar, closed the notes app, closed the message thread, but I couldn't close the pattern. He hadn't slipped, he had structured it. And now there was only one question left in my mind. If he was telling her he was trying to leave, how long had he planned this? And was I the only one who didn't know I was already halfway out of my own marriage? The strangest part wasn't the anger, it was the doubt. I wish I could say I read those messages and immediately felt righteous, clear, certain, but I didn't. After the timeline, after the confrontation, after the pattern, there was still a small voice whispering, "What if he's right? What if I did change? What if I did become colder without realizing it?" Because that's how narrative inversion works. It doesn't just accuse you, it seeps into you. I started replaying everything from the last year. Did I hesitate too often? Did I say "I'm tired" too many times? Did I stop initiating as much? And even if I had, did that make me frigid? I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning and stared at myself, trying to see what he saw, trying to locate the frost. But all I saw was exhaustion, work stress, life routine, marriage rhythm, normal fluctuations, not rejection, not indifference, not coldness. I thought about the nights he had reached for me, how I had leaned in, how we had laughed afterward, how sometimes we'd talk for a few minutes before sleeping. Those weren't the actions of a woman who felt nothing, but in his story, I was emotionally unavailable. And that's when it hit me. His version of unavailable wasn't about affection. It was about exclusivity. If I wasn't solely responsible for regulating his ego, if I wasn't endlessly responsive, if I wasn't enthusiastic every single time, then I was distant. He didn't want intimacy. He wanted reassurance, constant, unquestioned, and when marriage stopped being new, when comfort replaced novelty, when routine replaced urgency, he interpreted normalcy as rejection. But instead of telling me that, instead of saying, I feel insecure, I miss the early days, I need more connection, he outsourced it to her, and he packaged it in language that made me defective. I found myself analyzing one word over and over. Frigid is such a violent word. It doesn't just mean cold. It implies dysfunction. It implies something wrong at the core. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized how strategic it was. Because if he told her, my wife and I have normal ups and downs, there's no drama, no urgency, no justification. But if he said, my wife is frigid, now there's a villain, now there's tragedy, now there's space for rescue. He didn't just want her, he wanted her sympathy, and sympathy requires a story. So he rewrote me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed to believe he was deprived, because if he admitted he wasn't, then the affair was pure indulgence. And indulgence is harder to defend to yourself. It's easier to say, I was lonely, than I wanted more. It's easier to say, she pushed me away, than I stepped out. I remembered something he once said casually months before I found the messages. You don't chase me the way you used to. I had laughed at the time. Chase? We were married, we shared a bed, we shared bills, we shared a life. What exactly was I supposed to be chasing? But now I understood. He wanted to be desired endlessly, and when the intensity of early love settled into stability, he interpreted that stability as absence. So he created a new environment where he could feel wanted again. And to protect that environment, he had to distort the one at home. I sat down at the edge of the bed one afternoon and tried to separate fact from fiction. Fact: we had sex regularly. Fact: he initiated often. Fact: I responded. Fact: he complimented me afterward. Fiction: I never touched him. Fiction: I was emotionally absent. Fiction: I rejected him constantly. The gap between fact and fiction wasn't small, it was intentional. And then I noticed something else that made my chest tighten. In some messages, he didn't just describe me, he analyzed me. She doesn't even realize how distant she is. She thinks everything's fine. He had diagnosed me without ever confronting me. He had decided my internal state without asking. He had labeled me unaware. And that part cut deeper than the rest, because it meant he had stripped me of self-awareness in his narrative. I wasn't just cold, I was oblivious, which meant he could justify not talking to me, because why bother explaining yourself to someone who doesn't get it? He had created a version of me that was both frigid and incapable of understanding, and in that version he was the emotionally intelligent one, the sensitive one, the patient one, the one trying. I realized something in that moment that steadied me. He didn't want me to be warm. He wanted me to be wrong, because wrong wives justify wandering husbands. Warm wives complicate affairs. And I wasn't wrong. I was normal. I was human. I was not endlessly novel, but I was present. And I started to see the deeper betrayal. He wasn't just protecting the affair, he was protecting his identity. He couldn't be the man who cheated while still loved. He had to be the man who escaped emotional starvation. So he starved the story and fed her the illusion. I went back to the messages one last time, scrolled through the thread slowly. This time, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for tone, and I saw it. He didn't sound desperate. He didn't sound devastated. He sounded composed, measured, strategic. He was crafting an image, and I wasn't a wife in that image. I was an obstacle, a reason, a justification. And suddenly, something inside me shifted. Not heartbreak, not jealousy, clarity. He didn't cheat because I was cold. He called me cold because he cheated. And that difference changed everything, because if I wasn't effective, if I wasn't frigid, if I wasn't the cause, then I wasn't obligated to fix anything. And that realization scared him more than the confrontation ever could. But there was still one message left, one that I hadn't fully processed, one that wasn't about how I behaved or how he felt. It was about what he promised her. And once I read it again carefully, I understood that this wasn't just narrative inversion. It was preparation. The strangest part wasn't the anger, it was the doubt. I wish I could say I read those messages and immediately felt righteous, clear, certain, but I didn't. After the timeline, after the confrontation, after the pattern, there was still a small voice whispering, "What if he's right? What if I did change? What if I did become colder without realizing it?" Because that's how narrative inversion works. It doesn't just accuse you, it seeps into you. I started replaying everything from the last year. Did I hesitate too often? Did I say I'm tired too many times? Did I stop initiating as much? And even if I had, did that make me frigid? I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning and stared at myself, trying to see what he saw, trying to locate the frost. But all I saw was exhaustion, work stress, life routine, marriage rhythm, normal fluctuations, not rejection, not indifference, not coldness. I thought about the nights he had reached for me, how I had leaned in, how we had laughed afterward, how sometimes we'd talk for a few minutes before sleeping. Those weren't the actions of a woman who felt nothing, but in his story, I was emotionally unavailable. And that's when it hit me. His version of unavailable wasn't about affection. It was about exclusivity. If I wasn't solely responsible for regulating his ego, if I wasn't endlessly responsive, if I wasn't enthusiastic every single time, then I was distant. He didn't want intimacy. He wanted reassurance, constant, unquestioned, and when marriage stopped being new, when comfort replaced novelty, when routine replaced urgency, he interpreted normalcy as rejection. But instead of telling me that, instead of saying, "I feel insecure, I miss the early days, I need more connection," he outsourced it to her, and he packaged it in language that made me defective. I found myself analyzing one word over and over. Frigid is such a violent word. It doesn't just mean cold. It implies dysfunction. It implies something wrong at the core. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized how strategic it was. Because if he told her, "My wife and I have normal ups and downs," there's no drama, no urgency, no justification. But if he said, "My wife is frigid," now there's a villain. Now there's tragedy. Now there's space for rescue. He didn't just want her. He wanted her sympathy, and sympathy requires a story. So he rewrote me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed to believe he was deprived, because if he admitted he wasn't, then the affair was pure indulgence. And indulgence is harder to defend to yourself. It's easier to say, "I was lonely," than "I wanted more." It's easier to say, "She pushed me away," than "I stepped out." I remembered something he once said casually months before I found the messages. "You don't chase me the way you used to." I had laughed at the time. Chase? We were married, we shared a bed, we shared bills, we shared a life. What exactly was I supposed to be chasing? But now I understood. He wanted to be desired endlessly, and when the intensity of early love settled into stability, he interpreted that stability as absence. So he created a new environment where he could feel wanted again. And to protect that environment, He had to distort the one at home. I sat down at the edge of the bed one afternoon and tried to separate fact from fiction. Fact: we had sex regularly. Fact: he initiated often. Fact: I responded. Fact: he complimented me afterward. Fiction: I never touched him. Fiction: I was emotionally absent. Fiction: I rejected him constantly. The gap between fact and fiction wasn't small, it was intentional. And then I noticed something else that made my chest tighten. In some messages, he didn't just describe me, he analyzed me. She doesn't even realize how distant she is. She thinks everything's fine. He had diagnosed me without ever confronting me. He had decided my internal state without asking. He had labeled me unaware. And that part cut deeper than the rest, because it meant he had stripped me of self-awareness in his narrative. I wasn't just cold, I was oblivious, which meant he could justify not talking to me, because why bother explaining yourself to someone who doesn't get it? He had created a version of me that was both frigid and incapable of understanding, and in that version he was the emotionally intelligent one, the sensitive one, the patient one, the one trying. I realized something in that moment that steadied me. He didn't want me to be warm. He wanted me to be wrong, because wrong wives justify wandering husbands. Warm wives complicate affairs. And I wasn't wrong. I was normal. I was human. I was not endlessly novel, but I was present. And I started to see the deeper betrayal. He wasn't just protecting the affair, he was protecting his identity. He couldn't be the man who cheated while still loved. He had to be the man who escaped emotional starvation. So he starved the story and fed her the illusion. I went back to the messages one last time, scrolled through the thread slowly. This time, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for tone, and I saw it. He didn't sound desperate. He didn't sound devastated. He sounded composed, measured, strategic. He was crafting an image, and I wasn't a wife in that image. I was an obstacle, a reason, a justification. And suddenly, something inside me shifted. Not heartbreak, not jealousy, clarity. He didn't cheat because I was cold. He called me cold because he cheated. And that difference changed everything, because if I wasn't defective, if I wasn't frigid, if I wasn't the cause, then I wasn't obligated to fix anything. And that realization scared him more than the confrontation ever could. But there was still one message left, one that I hadn't fully processed, one that wasn't about how I behaved or how he felt. It was about what he promised her. And once I read it again carefully, I understood that this wasn't just narrative inversion. It was preparation. It's strange how one word can linger longer than an entire marriage. Frigid. It echoed in my head for weeks after everything came apart. Not because I believed it, but because I couldn't understand how someone who had shared my bed could describe me like that. I replayed moments over and over. The way he used to pull me closer, the way he'd say my name softly in the dark, the way he'd brush my hair back from my face like it meant something. If I was cold, why did he keep reaching for me? If I was distant, why did he keep staying? The answer finally came to me months later, not in anger but in clarity. He didn't need me to be warm. He needed me to be insufficient. There's a difference. Warmth can coexist with temptation. Insufficiency justifies escape, and that's what he was building. Not an affair, an exit story. A story where he wasn't the man who wanted more. He was the man who endured less. He needed her to believe he was starving. He needed himself to believe it too, because it's easier to betray someone who is cold, harder to betray someone who loves you. And I did love him. That's the part he edited out. He removed the affection. He removed the laughter. He removed the ordinary tenderness. He removed the nights we were fine. And he replaced it with a version of me that made him look noble, wounded, misunderstood. But I've learned something about people who rewrite others. They don't just distort reality. They depend on you, doubting yourself. Because if you start questioning their version, the whole structure collapses. There were weeks after everything unraveled where I caught myself hesitating, in new conversations, in new relationships. I would ask myself, am I distant right now? Am I too reserved? Am I emotionally unavailable? And then I would stop and breathe and separate fact from projection. I am not endlessly expressive. I am not constantly dramatic. I am not theatrical with affection, but I am present. I am responsive. I am capable of intimacy. I am not a block of ice. I am a human being with rhythms. And marriage, real marriage, isn't constant performance. It's fluctuation. It's comfort. It's sometimes quiet. It's sometimes tired. It's sometimes intense. It's rarely cinematic. And that's normal. What wasn't normal was turning normal into evidence. What wasn't normal was using shared intimacy as proof of rejection. What wasn't normal was sleeping beside me and telling someone else I was emotionally absent. That's not loneliness, that's manipulation. I've thought a lot about the way he described me, about how carefully he chose his words, about how he escalated from distant to frigid. And I see it now. Each word made leaving easier. Each word distanced him from guilt. Each word turned me into something easier to step away from. If I was frigid, then I wasn't a loss. If I was cold, then I wasn't warmth abandoned. If I was emotionally unavailable, then he wasn't the one who withdrew. He didn't just cheat, he reframed. And reframing is powerful because people don't just believe stories, they live inside them. For a while, I almost lived inside his. I almost believed that I had failed in some invisible way, that I hadn't been enthusiastic enough, that I hadn't performed affection correctly. But here's what I know now. If someone needs to distort you to justify leaving you, they were already gone. The rewriting is just the cleanup. And I stopped trying to clean up his version. I stopped trying to prove I wasn't cold. I stopped trying to defend moments he had already weaponized. Instead, I did something simpler. I reclaimed the facts. We were intimate. We were connected. He chose to step outside, and he needed a villain. I just happened to be available. That realization didn't make the betrayal disappear, but it removed the poison. Because the most corrosive part of narrative inversion isn't the accusation, it's the self-doubt. And once I stopped doubting myself, the rest felt smaller. He can tell anyone he wants that I was frigid. He can describe a version of me that makes him feel justified. But the truth doesn't change. I know who I was in that marriage. I know what I gave, I know what we shared, and I know what he rewrote. Sometimes I think about the moment I read that first message. She hasn't touched me in months. We had just been together. That irony doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it feels almost revealing, because it shows exactly how much effort it took to maintain his illusion. It takes work to lie like that. It takes planning. It takes narrative discipline. It takes repetition. Truth doesn't require that much maintenance. It just is. I wasn't cold. I wasn't withholding. I wasn't frigid. He needed me to be. And once I understood that, I stopped carrying a word that was never mine.